Today at T-Mobile, I'm joined by a special co-anchor.
What up, everybody? It's your boy, Big Snoop Deal Double G.
Snoop, where can people go to find great deals?
Head to T-Mobile.com and get 4 iPhone 16s with Apple Intelligence on us, plus 4 lines for $25.
That's quite a deal, Snoop. And when you switch to T-Mobile, you can save versus the other big guys' comparable plans plus streaming.
Respect. And we up out of here.
See how you can save on wireless and streaming versus the other big guys at T-Mobile.com/switch. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later.
As a longtime foreign correspondent, I've worked in lots of places, but nowhere as important to the world as China. I'm Jane Perlez, former Beijing bureau chief for the New York Times. On Face Off, the US versus China, we'll explore what's critical to this important global relationship. Trump and Xi Jinping, AI, TikTok, and even Hollywood. New episodes of Face Off are available now, wherever you get your podcasts.
Hello, and thank you for listening to The History of World War II podcast, episode 524, The Line Has Been Drawn at Stalingrad. Last time, Hitler agreed that Army Group A, seeking to take Russia's oil, should pull back. Not that it mattered, as a Soviet attack forced the issue. Adding to this calamity, General Paulus refused to break out, and Luftwaffe airfields supplying Paulus were being attacked. And lastly, the Soviets offered the stubborn German general an offer he seemingly could not refuse, until he did. So on the morning of January 10th, 1943, thousands of guns opened up on the Germans' most westward positions. And with that, the Sixth Army wasn't going anywhere. This artillery barrage lasted for an hour. Then, men from the Soviet 21st and 65th Armies moved forward, supported by T-34 tanks. Roskosovsky, in overall command, had been told by his intelligence that the enemy had about 85,000 men still around Stalingrad, but that most of them were not fit to fight. So instead of anything complicated, it was to be a straightforward attack. Now, this could and has backfired in war, but the Soviet intelligence units got it right. The Sixth Army was on its last leg and low on fuel and ammunition, which soon meant that many of those 85,000 Axis troops were about to become prisoners. But that's not what happened. Their fate would be much worse. To borrow from modern culture, since the opening of Operation Barbarossa, Stalin had issued the order, if the fascists do not surrender, they must die. In other words, if you come for the king, you best not miss. Well, Moscow had been approached, its outskirts penetrated, but Army Group Center had missed. Now the men of Army Group South would feel the full effects of this. As this attack was coming from the west, again to make sure that the Sixth Army had no hope of retreating, the front defensive lines here of the Axis were quickly breached. And as Stalin's word was law, wounded Axis soldiers were shot where they were. One field hospital had every patient shot where they lay. The medical staffs, though, were taken to serve Mother Russia. No sense in wasting good talent. Again, as the first day saw the Axis lines ruptured, the two Soviet armies started pushing the enemy closer to Stalingrad and further away from help, which is when General Kleist of Army Group A had asked Manstein for help, and which is why he received so little of it. Manstein was told of the Soviet attack and was trying to react, which is not to say he was trying to think of a way to assist Sixth Army. No, he was thinking of himself. For if Stalingrad was recaptured by the enemy entirely, what was to stop all those troops, all those armies, from then turning on him and his? Not to mention Army Group B, not to mention Army Group A, currently retreating for its life, and back to him. And yet, this is where Paulus's hoarding of fuel and ammunition paid off. Recognizing this as the enemy's main push, he released the reserves. The panzers started up. The men were handed more bullets than they had seen in weeks. Those who could surged ahead, and being trained professionals, not to mention desperate, they laid into the Russian enemy, who was using the ineffective tactics of old. By the end of the second day, Roskosovsky's offensive was halted and mauled, losing some 30,000 men and half of the tanks currently in this battle. The Soviet thrust was brought up short at the Rossokar River, about 6 miles or 9 kilometers northwest of Gumrak Airfield. This time-buying local victory for the Axis was only that, for surely the enemy had entire armies in the area, all around Stalingrad. It only delayed the inevitable, if Berlin could not somehow build on this. And that's exactly what Hitler intended to do. Seeing a chance, he ordered the Luftwaffe to renew their efforts to supply the Sixth Army. He ordered in more aircraft and air crews to the nearest airfield, still in German hands, to Stalingrad. But Roskosovsky had not lived this long by disappointing Stalin. On January 16th, after moving men into place, he launched another attack. This one was able to cross the Rossokar River, and just before the sunset, they captured the Potomnik airfield, located just to the southwest of Gumrak. This, of course, left only Gumrak for the Luftwaffe, but so bombed out was the airstrip itself that German pilots would only fly over and parachute supplies down to the waiting men. To try to land there was to court disaster. No use in becoming one of the trapped. Of course, this also meant that wounded Axis soldiers were no longer being transported out. This pushed the Axis medical staff to no longer try to save those who were seriously wounded. The comrades of the wounded bringing them in were encouraged to shoot them, to save them from suffering. Failure, like success, builds on itself.
Incoming transmission.
Hello, my name is Matt.
And I'm McKinley. We are the father-son team that brings you History Dispatches.
History Dispatches is a short daily history show where we talk about topics from all over the world and all throughout history. We talk about people, places, events, and even objects.
While anything is fair game, we have a soft spot for the weird, the wacky, and the obscure things you may have never even heard of.
Do you have any examples?
How about Wojtek, the bear who rose to the rank of corporal in the Polish army? Or the Great Emu War? Or how about the biggest treasure take in the history of piracy?
That sounds cool, but do you have a story about the head of Oliver Cromwell? Or one about the ancient library of Alexandria? And a story about the first woman to climb Mount Everest would be cool.
Well, we got those as well. Every weekday there's something new and fun.
Sweet. So how do I get this trove of goodness?
All you have to do is go to historydispatches.com or just look for History Dispatches in your favorite podcast app.
This Soviet offensive only lasted one day, coming to a close on January 17th. But they had just taken half of the territory Paulus had controlled, which seemed to be a tipping point for the general. He readied an order to break out. They would head south, and once outside the city, it was every man for himself. As in, the steppe was an wide open range with nowhere to hide. Still, needs must. However, the enigmatic Paulus never gave the order. Still, some of his men, taking Soviet greatcoats from the dead, managed to exit the city. Not that they reached safety. That was no longer possible. So, this was it. Even Paulus saw that. And on January 20th, he wrote a letter to his wife, put his signet ring with it, and handed it over to a courier. Hitler had ordered that one man from each division be airlifted out, and one of those would take Paulus's package. Moreover, Hitler had ordered that select experienced panzer officers were to be the couriers, obviously thinking of the future. 2 days later, January 22nd, Gumrak airfield itself was captured by another Russian attack. Now, this left the much smaller emergency airfield Stalingradsky closer to the city center. But again, supplies would only be parachuted from here on out. By January 24th, the Axis troops were now only in the city itself, and 2 days later came another Soviet attack. And taking a page from the German battle book, the Axis position was hit in its middle, forcing a split of the German-held territory. Paulus was in the southern half, but one man who looked forward to this day was General Chuikov. His 62nd Army was reached and reinforced. On that day, January 26th, Paulus received a radio message from Hitler. It read, "Surrender is out of the question. Troops must fight to the end. If possible, hold a reduced fortress with those troops still battle-worthy. Bravery and tenacity of fortress has provided the opportunity to establish a new front and launch counterattacks. The Sixth Army has fulfilled its historic contribution in the greatest passage in German history," which, as Dear John letters go, isn't bad, but it did not help the Sixth Army. As for the new front spoken of, that was technically true. By this point, Kleist of Army Group A, well, minus the 17th Army, was back across the Don River at Rostov. The 17th Army, meanwhile, under General Ruoff, had entrenched itself at the tip of the Kuban Peninsula. Again, not that this helped the Sixth Army. Having his own intense battles with the enemy, Kleist had managed to get his army, all of it, out from the building trap and reach the Don. The result? Kleist was promoted to Field Marshal. But he was not alone. On January 30th, Hitler also made Paulus a Field Marshal. However, the Field Marshal was currently prostrate with dysentery. Now, a German Field Marshal had never surrendered. Perhaps this was what Hitler was going for, but again, it did not change the circumstances on the ground in central Stalingrad. Not by one iota. The next day, January 31st, the Russians were about to launch another attack, this one aimed at the southern Axis pocket, within a large shop in Central Square. But just as Lieutenant Fyodor Yelchenko was about to give the order, a German officer with a white flag stuck his head out of the doorway. The German officer told Yelchenko that his superior wanted to surrender, and not wanting to die himself, Yelchenko agreed to listen. It could be a trap, but it was worth taking the chance. Yelchenko went into the large shop with two of his men. When they got inside, they saw hundreds of enemy soldiers, and every single one of them had a gun. Yelchenko tried not to show his fear. The German officer took Yelchenko and company down into the cellar. There they met a Colonel Rask. Rask introduced them to General Schmidt, the Chief of Staff. Schmidt said that Field Marshal Paulus was not in a condition to handle this talk. Rask asked, "What are the terms of surrender?" Yelchenko, knowing his place, was smart enough to simply recite the order from Roskosovsky, who received it from Stalin. Surrender or die. Rask, taking this in, asked for Paulus to not be treated roughly, not because of his illness, but because for all of their collective dignity. Yelchenko let this pass and asked, "Are you surrendering to me?" Rask affirmed that he was. Yelchenko left and contacted headquarters. They sent a car and a squad of men to take Paulus away. He was treated with respect. However, perhaps as a souvenir, Yelchenko removed Paulus's pistol. No sense in giving the enemy general a last chance to kill a Soviet officer. Yelchenko was also about to take Paulus's penknife, but the field marshal said he would need that. So the Russian lieutenant let him keep it.
Welcome to True Spies, the podcast that takes you deep inside the greatest secret missions of all time.
Suddenly out of the darkness appeared Bin Laden.
You'll meet the people who live life undercover. What do they know? What are their skills? And what would you do in their position?
Vengeance felt good. Seeing these people pay for what they'd done felt righteous.
True Spies from Spyscape Studios, wherever you get your podcasts.
Field Marshal Paulus was taken to Roskosovsky, who questioned him. The first thing the Russian officer did was confirm that Paulus was surrendering his southern pocket. He was, and he promised to order the northern pocket to surrender as well. The order was sent out, but the northern pocket held out for 2 more days. But even then, a few smaller pockets continued to fight on for 2 more days. But honor being satisfied, they then surrendered. What they would find out was that it was not wise to be the last ones to surrender in Stalin's Russia. The Wehrmacht as a whole had just lost 15% of itself. In response, Berlin put the country on a complete war footing for the first time. But in much more hushed tones, there was talk of reaching out to Moscow to perhaps open negotiations with a view to a peaceful resolution. But when these whispers reached Hitler, he put the kibosh on them. Considering all the violence visited on the Russian people, civilian and military, his life, or the lack thereof, had to be Stalin's number one goal. And as he would not survive a Russian victory, Germany would fight on. But what did not bode well for the struggling Germans was that Russia had just lost some 650,000 people, military and civilian, in this series of battles, and yet they were not only still in the fight, but getting stronger by the day. How was one to defeat such an enemy? Comparatively, the Axis, German, Italian, and Romanians, had suffered around 250,000 killed, wounded, or now a prisoner of war. A firmer number is that when Paulus surrendered, the Soviets took 111,465 prisoners, which was only the beginning of their suffering. By spring of that year, half of this number were dead due to disease, starvation, or execution, and as for the first two listed, it's not like they were in solid health to begin with. And ending this chapter of this sorry tale, the last Germans repatriated took place in 1955, and only 5,000 of these men ever made it back home. However, there was still the wider war to fight. Postscript. Despite the fate of the majority of this army, Field Marshal Paulus was treated much better by his captors. Still, he refused to confirm any war crimes committed by his men, and he would sign nothing to that effect. But it can always get worse. His son would be killed in Italy, and when the plot to kill Hitler failed on July 20th, 1944, Paulus then started making broadcasts for the Soviets, calling on his country to surrender, to save itself. Paulus later testified at the Nuremberg trials, and he would be released from prison in 1953, dying 4 years later. As for his immediate opponent, General Chuikov, still a hero in Volgograd today, he would lead the 8th Guards Army, his redesignated 62nd Army, all the way to Berlin. He would become CNC of the Red Army in 1972 and die 10 years later. As for the German 6th Army, yes, it had died in Stalingrad, but would be reborn, which is why Hitler had a man from each division flown out. It was reconstituted on March 5th, 1943, but would die again on May 9th, 1945. 2 days after Germany surrendered, when its commander surrendered to American troops near Vienna. Postscript. Near the Rasochka River is the Rasochka German War Cemetery. It is a resting place and a place of remembrance for those who died during the Battle of Stalingrad. There's also a Soviet War cemetery nearby. Within the German cemetery, there are 65,000 soldiers. However, in September of 2019, 1,837 more Germans were placed there, having been discovered in a mass grave when a water pipeline was being moved. Stalin's word was law. Greetings, everyone, from Central Virginia. So, wow, Stalingrad has come to an end. This is going to sound strange, sorry, but when I finished writing the rough draft, I got a little something. I don't know. Nostalgia. I don't know. It's like I really feel this one. Anyway, so we're going to move on from there. We still got the those trapped on the Kuban Peninsula, and of course Manstein and the forces there, and the two other army groups. But anyway, so this has come to a close. The Germans have had suffered their big defeats. They've lost a lot of men, and again, at this point, it's easy to argue this is not recoverable. You can still keep fighting. You can still keep resisting, but the real, honest idea of winning after this seems to me far-fetched, but we lie to ourselves all the time, and I'm sure Hitler was doing that at this particular moment. Anyways, so I'd like to say welcome aboard to some members. Is that Robert Browzaw? Sorry, Robert. I think he's from Alberta, Canada. Thank you very much for joining. Bruce Robertson, thank you very much, Bruce. And Jordan Hewitt from Yuma, Arizona. And as far as donations, let's see here. There is Sean. Is that Wiswesser? Wiswesser. There we go, Wiswesser. Sorry, Sean. He told me in the email he is definitely interested in the Eastern Front as he is a former Russian specialist. I don't know if I was supposed to say that. I hope I didn't compromise anything, Sean, but you're probably retired. It's all good. Anyway, and lastly, as far as donations, Stephen Whitby. So thank you very much, Stephen. So yeah, I'm going to go ahead and do the Peninsula Tip, Kuban Peninsula Tip campaign, even though it goes to October 43, and then we'll back up and hit other parts of the Eastern Front. And then I'm going to take this opportunity to bring the Americans in. Going to back up a little bit to November of 42, but bring them into Morocco and North Africa and get that ball rolling. So, so it's, I'm looking forward to this. I've been doing this for years and I barely talked about the Americans. So, looking forward to that and exploring other theaters as well. So thank you for listening. I will see you as soon as I can with the next episode. And as always, take care, everyone.
From the creators of the popular science show with millions of YouTube subscribers comes the Minute Earth podcast. Every episode of the show dives deep into a science question you might not even know you had. But once you hear the answer, you'll want to share it with everyone you know. Why do rivers curve? Why did the T-Rex have such tiny arms? And why do so many more kids need glasses now than they used to? Spoiler alert, it isn't screen time. Our team of scientists digs into the research and breaks it down into a short, entertaining explanation, jam-packed with science facts and terrible puns. Subscribe to Minute Earth wherever you like to listen.